So thanks for joining this afternoon, and I'm going to talk all about comic book collecting. It's a hobby that I've been interested in since I was 10 years old. I am not going to tell you how many comics I have because it's kind of embarrassing. My wife wishes I had very few, more than I have now. Like Patrick said, I've only got about 20 minutes. I might stretch to 30 because I am known to talk, but I'll try to move it along quickly. So first off, being in Winnipeg, it's a really great place to collect comic books. If you include the flea market vendors, we have almost 20 locations where you can go and hunt down books. As a bit of a side project, 2 years ago, I created a website where I track all the open comic book shops, used bookstores, and the closed shops going back to about the 50s. It was a really fun project that I worked on. I'm also an admin of a fairly large local Facebook group. We have about 800 members, and we do a lot of buying and selling and discussion. So the first comic books. Well, we go back to 1897 with a book called The Yellow Kid. This is considered the first real comic book. It was basically a collection of cartoons from the New York Journal. And that collection of strips is something that is going to be standard in the very early years of comics. Publishers did that, readily available content, and they were able to put together books and sell them quite easily. In 1933, the very first comic that defined the format that we know today was Funnies on Parade, and shortly after, Famous Funnies. So these books basically established that standard format. And again, these were mostly collected newspaper strip reprints. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about comic book ages. So comic historians have divided books up based on the feel and the tone that they had during the eras. The first era is called the Platinum Age. Again, these books were mostly newspaper reprints or pulp characters that were appearing in magazines or books at the time, like Dick Tracy. And there was a lot of different experimentation in size and formats. Next up, we have the Golden Age, and everybody agrees that that's defined by the very first appearance of Superman in a comic book. This is the holy grail of collecting. Last month, a 8.5 condition copy sold for $3.25 million. Fun fact, if you guys remember the Heritage Minute vignettes that would come out on CBC, Joe Shuster, one of the creators of Superman, was a Canadian. So here are just some great covers from the Golden Age. Make note of the one on the right. What we saw during World War II was that the heroes were used to battle the Axis forces. And so there's a lot of covers during that time where they showed Captain America and Submariner and others, Human Torch, fighting the Japanese and the Germans. A few more covers here from the Golden Age. Science fiction was very popular, and we saw a lot of covers and titles like that. So fast forward to 1950, and superhero books had basically stopped publishing, and the really hot books at the time were horror and crime. But these books were really violent. They portrayed criminals in a positive light, and so this psychologist by the name of Frederick Werdum, he wrote some articles in some magazines in '48, and later he published a book called The Seduction of the Innocent, basically blaming comics for juvenile delinquency. I am very proud, I don't know if you can see that, I have a copy myself, and what's really unique of my copy is there is a bibliography at the back. Werdum was worried about being sued by the publishers, so soon after this first edition was released, he tore the bibliography out of all of the unsold copies, so I'm really happy to have that one in my collection. There were congressional hearings related to this, and the outcome, to me, was the real horror. There were actual conservative and religious groups went around collecting books from kids, and they would have book burning parties. The fine print on the one on the left is actually, it's a photo from Vancouver, British Columbia, and it says, the roundup by the JC Youth leadership brought 8,000 comics to the funeral flames. That's just really tragic. So shortly after that, what was developed was something called the Comics Code Authority. I'm not going to read all of these bullets, but you can scan them yourself. Basically, it was a guideline for publishers, and then it was a stamp on the book, so parents and other retailers were happy that the comic that they were buying was going to be good and wholesome and not corrupt their children. I want to make note of one of the bullets, scenes dealing with The Walking Dead, torture, vampires, ghouls, werewolfism are prohibited. I'm going to get back to that when we enter into the Bronze Age. So Gaines was publishing these horror books at the time, and he couldn't make any more money, so he decided to drop all those titles, and he focused on a little book that he had started in '52 called Mad Magazine, and that went on to publish right up until 2018, and I think everybody's heard of that one. The Silver Age. So the publishers, what they did was they dusted off all those heroes from the Golden Age, cleaned them up, and put them in these really campy, fun, children-friendly stories. And these characters that were developed in the Silver Age are now the ones that are feeding our billion-dollar movie and television industry. Here are some great covers of Spider-Man. The one on the far right is his first appearance, and that's what I call a mortgage book. That in a high grade, that one will cost you about $1 million. Other covers, Avengers and Fantastic Four by the great artist Jack Kirby, and the first appearance of Green Lantern on the right. A few more here, X-Men #1, Silver Surfer, Battling Thor, fantastic cover, and a really great Neil Adams Superman cover on the right. So in 1970, we enter into the Bronze Age, and if you think back to what was happening in America at the time, just the whole country was tired. The Vietnam War was stretching out, Janis and Jimmy had died, the Beatles were breaking up. And the other thing in the industry was a lot of these artists from the Silver Age were retiring and going into management, and all these young artists were coming into the industry and had all these great creative progressive ideas. And so there was this return to darker plots and storylines that would focus on drugs and alcoholism. So the panels on the left here come from Amazing Spider-Man '96. In '71, it was a story arc that featured Harry Osborn being addicted to pills, and that was a great concern to his buddy Peter Parker. In the middle, Green Arrow's ward, Speedy, was addicted to heroin, and we see Tony Stark, Iron Man, struggling with his drinking problem in '79. Trending with those darker themes, we have the death of Gwen Stacy in ASM 121. We had characters like the Punisher coming out, who were using violence to stop criminals, and things were getting more progressive. We have the first black hero with his own title, Luke Cage. And the monsters are back. Remember, you couldn't publish anything about werewolves or vampires. Well, we saw a rise in a lot of the horror titles coming back. Make a note of this Tomb of Dracula #1. I'm going to talk about that at the very end. It's very significant. Now we have the modern age, which is basically '84 to now. People argue a little bit about when it started, but in general, it was the rise of independent publishers. Fantasy horror themes were coming back, a lot of X-Men spin-offs, and just generally a lot of variety in comic collecting. So here are a few covers from that era. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think everybody here knows them. Those books are really hot right now because of nostalgia. With people like myself with some disposable income, going back to buy the books from their childhood. We have Hellboy in the middle appearing, and a great cover by Todd McFarlane of Spawn. Again, those horror and fantasy titles were becoming popular. Sandman by Neil Gaiman, famous author. Preacher, which is recently a television series, and Hellblazer, John Constantine. There was a movie a few years back with Keanu Reeves called Constantine, and that's based on that book series. Two very significant graphic novels at the time, Batman the Dark Knight, was basically Batman coming out of retirement at the age of 55. It's a really dark story, but it is considered today one of the most influential Batman stories ever published, written by Frank Miller. The Killing Joke is considered the sort of definitive origin story, very dark as well. And on the right, we have the very first appearance of Venom, which is a very popular character still today. So, a lot of people say, well, aren't comics just for kids? Well, I think a lot of academics at these institutions might argue with you. I've got a list of various institutions there that offer master's and PhD studies in graphic novels and comics. There is a professional association called the Comic Study Society, and what's interesting about that is a professor at UW, Candida Riefkind, is the current president. And just last month, close to home, U of M and U of T collaborated on the first ever Indigenous graphic novel symposium, and that was really well received, and I hope to continue that on. So, if you haven't ever read a comic since you were a kid, I'm going to recommend two that I think everybody should read. And I have both copies of these two, and I'd be happy to lend them to anybody. This first one is Mouse by Spiegelman. It's the first ever graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize, and I don't think anyone has won since. It's basically told from the story of animals, and it's Spiegelman interviewing his father about his experience during the Holocaust. Very, very compelling book. This next one, The Watchmen. Many of you may be familiar. It was a really good movie, recently a TV series, written by Alan Moore. Fun fact about Alan Moore, he is an actual wizard. He's an occultist and a ceremonial magician. But most importantly, in my opinion, he's one of the best comic book writers of all time. So now we are in present day, the last 10 years or so, movies and television. This is a really nice collage of all the Marvel movies that have come out in the past few years. And the one thing I want to say about this is I mentioned the creator Jack Kirby. Almost every single character you see in this collage was created by him, with Stan Lee putting words to the page. He created hundreds of characters during the Silver Age, and just an incredible talent. And there are many, many more to come. For the next 2 years, these are the lineups for the Marvel and DC films. I just hope that the big screens open up soon and I can go enjoy this. And movies and television. There isn't a series that's out there now that is popular that doesn't have some kind of backing in a comic book. Preacher was very popular. The Watchmen, again, I mentioned. I'm really excited about the one in the middle there by Brian Vaughan, The Why, The Last Man. That's going to be really great. And Paper Girls is probably going to be pretty good as well. So what's in the box? That's just a saying that we say when we want to know, we buy something, you put it up on your Facebook group. What do I collect? Well, I like to collect full runs of books. Not everybody does, but it gets me a lot of comics. It allows me, when I go out, I can always find an issue that I'm working on in a series. And so these are 4 of the larger runs that I've completed. Ones that I'm currently working on, I'm almost finished. A really funny story about Sugar and Spike. When my daughter was born, I thought, I'm going to get her a series that she might like to read when she's older. And little did I know that this series is very, very incredibly hard to find in good grades. And she's 17 now, and I still haven't finished, but I will one day soon. These next 2 are books that I have in my collection that I'm really proud to own. There's nothing particularly important about this particular issue, but the creator, June Tarpe Mills, is one of the first female comic artists, and she, Miss Fury, is the first female action hero created by a woman. So what, as you can imagine, in 1945, June Mills had to publish under a pseudonym to hide her gender at the time. This next one is very, very scarce. I looked for it for about 10 years until I found a copy that I thought I could afford. It basically, there was a group in Harlem in the early 60s that were given a grant to develop a strategic plan to help young people who were struggling with crime and just identity, consciousness. And so they put this out as a way to promote their strategic plan. And what's really interesting I found about this was, I think this book was put out basically weeks before the Harlem riot in '64. And that may be why few of them have survived, but I'm just very glad to have a copy. So the other thing that I like to collect that not everybody does is promotional comics. So promotional comics are basically comics used to promote an idea, sell a product, or as you'll see later in some slides, used for propaganda. This one is just a massive run. There's 500 in the series. I have about a third of them. I don't think I'll ever finish it. This particular issue is more valuable. It starts a long run of about 10 issues that talks about the evils of communism. Another series that I'm almost finished collecting also has some Christian themes to it. One of the reasons I like this one is because the creator, Al Hartley, worked for Archie Comics, and he was fortunate enough to get licensing for Archie, which is probably difficult at the time. And so a lot of the books use Archie and his gang to tell their stories. This one, just an example of a comic selling a product, but the fun story about this was the author, Tom McNally, was an outdoor editor for the Chicago Tribune. I looked him up, found out his son was also an outdoor editor, so I wrote him an email. I said, hey, what can you tell me about this comic? And he says, I didn't even know my dad wrote a comic. So I scanned it, sent him a copy, and he was really grateful, and we had a good exchange in that. So here's an example of how books have been used in propaganda. These are, I'm really happy to have these in my collection because you can't find these very often either. But basically, I call it a PSYOP by the United States government. They developed these books to convince people that communism was bad and that Castro was evil. And they printed millions of copies, but they only distributed them in Latin America, Mexico, Ecuador, Venezuela. And so you just don't ever see them for sale online. And I got these back in about 2000, and they're just super interesting. So investment and speculation. Well, as you know, movies and TV drive the market. Nostalgia is always important. But it's important to remember that the oldest books aren't the most valuable. Buy a good story, buy an interesting character, buy great art, and then you'll never be disappointed, and you'll always have something that you enjoy having in your collection. This one's maybe for Patrick. All your 80s and 90s comics are not likely valuable, but again, I'd be happy to look at them. I'm going to show you an example of how some collections, you know, they would go for $1 or $2 each, but you might have a key, you never know. So one thing that helps determine value is the grade of a book. For those of you maybe were into coins or stamps or trading cards, there are third-party companies that will turn your book into what I call a slab. Everybody calls it a slab. Basically, it's a grade given by a professional, but the unfortunate thing is the comic is now sealed in plastic and you can't read it. So now really they become an investment item. And these are just some examples of grades. Low grade 2.0. The yellow label indicates that the comic's been signed by a creator. So then as the grades go up, the one on the left is signed by Stan Lee. The 9.8s are probably your highest grade that you're going to get if you just bought a book off the shelf and you send it in to get graded. 10s exist, but they're very, very rare. So again, just an example from eBay. Probably hard to read those, but you know, a lot of 200, you might get a buck, make it $2, but there might be the keys, and there might be some of these in there. You never know. These are the granddaddies. These are the mortgage books, the retirement books, crazy prices. The section number 1 actually broke a record just last month. $3.25 million. First appearance of Batman in a series. Detective is first appearance of Batman ever. Marvel Comics, and then again, I mentioned before, the first appearance of Spider-Man. So if you don't have $1 million, what could you maybe invest in? Well, again, like I said, buy what you like. There's 4 more slides left. But these are going to be examples of books that you probably could have picked up for about $1,000. So it's a lot of money, but not too bad. That tripled in value in about 5 years. So this first one, the first appearance of Ghost Rider. So we all remember Nicolas Cage and the Ghost Rider movies. They were pretty awful. But the Ghost Rider character is really solid. The story's really good. So Marvel is going to try another crack at it. And as soon as news that Marvel is going to make a new Ghost Rider movie, the book tripled in value in the last 6 years. Next, we have Black Panther. So as you know, the Black Panther movie was very, very successful. You could have picked up this one in high grade for $1,000 in 2015. It's now easily tripled in value. 2 more. We have Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night is this issue is the first appearance of Moon Knight. Now Moon Knight's kind of a B-lister character, lesser known hero, but is solid stories. And Disney Plus is going to make a TV series starring Oscar Isaac, so everybody got excited, and that book has now tripled in value as well. And the last book, and almost the end of my presentation, The Tomb of Dracula, number 10. So if anybody noticed when I first showed that, yes, this is the first appearance of Blade the Vampire Slayer. So if you remember, Wesley Snipes did, in 1998, I think there's 3 movies, very popular, everybody loved them, super campy. So you know what, in 98, you probably could have got a high-grade copy of this book for, you know, maybe $100, $200. 5 years ago, it was $1,000, and this 9.8 copy there's not too many in that high grade, so that's why it got these ridiculous numbers, but like 10 grand in five years. So you can see how the grades or the values here drop a little bit. The lower grades aren't quite as expensive, but still, you could pick one up now for $2,000 and you could probably double your money in 2 or 3 years. So that's it. There's some references for finding out for more information, from pricing. Join a Facebook group, reach out to me, always happy to talk about comics. And if anybody has any questions, I don't know if you get this reference, but at the back of a lot of comic books are the sea monkeys, so I thought I'd end off with that. So thanks very much.
So Dave, there are a few questions that come from Adrian. Which 12 TWD issues are you missing?
Oh, number 1, of course. Here's a fun story about that. It won't take long. Usually the early issues and some of the keys. So I distinctly remember walking into a comic shop, looking at an issue of number 1 of The Walking Dead, and going, yeah, zombies. Well, it's not going to be interesting. And I put it back and I bought something else. And that, to buy the first issue of The Walking Dead right now is about $2,000. So I'm disappointed I didn't pick that one up when I did. I'm kind of waiting. I think maybe if the TV show dies off, maybe the prices will drop. But I'll shoot you a message, Adrian, if you've got some. I'll buy them off.
Okay. All right. So next question is from Theodorus. When you get comics graded and made into a slab, do you actually have to send them in, mail them, or do you bring them with you and have them rated in person?
That's a great question. There's the two places where they get done. There is in Florida for CGC, and the other company is in Texas. So you do have to mail them down. They have walk-in services, but you'd have to be on vacation or something to do that. So you send them in. It costs about $50 to get a comic graded. So you have to already have a quite valuable book to do that. But you pack them up safely and ship them down, and then you wait about 3 months, and then they come back and get your prints.
Okay. You got a lot of them, so settle in.
It's okay.
Okay.
Let me know if we're over time. I can talk offline with people too.
Oh yeah, Tara, if you can just let us know. All right, David West asks, do you physically read the books you buy, or do you keep them sealed and read them using some other means, digital or otherwise? Also, if you do, how?
Sure, good question. I'm very behind on my reading, but I have what's called a pull list, so I get new books every week. I usually go down on Saturdays. So I get about 2 or 3 a week. So I like to wait. If I get behind, I like to wait until the series is done. Sometimes, like The Walking Dead, is easy to find and read online, but I'm just very careful. And then I put them back in the plastic bag and put them away forever. And digital is an option too, but yeah, I try to read all of them, but I'm very, very behind.
Okay. To know how goes your birthday collection?
Oh, thanks, Chris. So quickly, you coming up different ways to collect things. I saw online someone collects their birthday books. So basically, I took the year I was born, 1968, and November, and I looked across Marvel and DC, and I found all the books that were published in November of 1968, made a list, and I'm missing 3. So some Archie books and Richie Rich, I think, and stuff that I'm not trying too hard to get. Yeah, that's fun.
All right. And question from Will. Christy, how do they sell the really valuable ones? Is there like a Christie's auction that handles that?
Yeah, Heritage Auctions is a big auction house that does books, and eBay is getting into it, and then there's some other sort of online retailers, comiccollect.com. These are big online retailers that are backed by some people with big money.
All right, that was the last one.
Okay, thanks everybody.